Out with a book on the auto industry, Stephen Rattner. Stephen, come on in here. We'll talk about the auto industry, overhaul, an insider's account of the Obama administration's emergency rescue of the industry. You and I have talked about it a lot. I want to get to it, but first we need the obligatory discussion of, I guess I'm going to call it legal festivities. Do you want to give us any update on what we've heard from the SEC and its linkage to Attorney General Cuomo's office?
Unfortunately, I'm really can't. My lawyers have instructed me. They're shocked. But I would say there's nothing festive about it. But
yeah, it's not festive.
At the appropriate time, I'll be happy to talk more about it.
Well, we would like to have you on the show and you can talk about it. One other question, if I may. I see in the media gradations of this, that, and the other thing. And I see this phrase, which personally drives me nuts because I really don't know what it means. Maybe you can help me. If you don't want to comment, I understand. What's a wrist slap?
What's a wrist slap?
Yeah, I'm hearing this all over. Do you want to comment on that?
You know, I think it speaks for itself. I think it's meant to be a punishment, but not the most severe punishment. I'm not sure what it has to do with me or anything that we're talking about, but that's what I think of a wrist slap.
Okay, and I've got to do a disclaimer here. Mr. Rattner managed money for Michael Bloomberg. He is the principal owner of Bloomberg LP and, of course, affiliated the parent company of Bloomberg News. Let's talk autos. I want to bring up what do I call dreaded first chart. I was shocked when I saw this chart, Steve. Here's Dearborn Blues. This is the good news. Ford Motor with the ascendancy through the 90s, and we come down and you see a pretty good move up here in 09, 10, a success, but so far to go. Talk about, away from your book, the success of Ford Motor.
Ford Motor really stands out because the important thing for people to recognize is that Ford and GM were facing the same set of challenges, the same UAW contract, the same competition from Japan, the same oil prices, the same credit crisis, and yet Ford, as your chart points out, never went bankrupt. The stock is up sixfold, I think, from its low. Why? The answer is management. Bill Ford knew what he didn't know and brought in Alan Mulally, an outsider who had never been in an auto plant, as far as I know, from Boeing to run that company. And the second thing they did was they were not complacent about their position. And when the crisis hit, they hocked every asset they had, including the Blue Oval, and went out and borrowed $23.5 billion for a rainy day fund.
You, as a manager of money, have been in, I'm going to guess, 3,242 road shows. You go in, and the managers turn it on, and there's a character, whether it's an industrial company or a service sector company. Provide the distinction between the Wagoner GM and the Bill Ford Motor.
Oh, I think it's night and day. The Wagoner GM was slow-moving, bureaucratic, couldn't make decisions, was complacent about the future. When you look at the reports they submitted to Congress and how much money they thought they would need, they were consistently wrong. In November of 08, they said, or October of 08, they said, if you give us $10 billion, we'll be fine. And we ended up giving them $50 billion, and they were off by a factor of 5. They had a CFO who could not tell you their cash balance within $500 million on a given day. I have spent a lot of time, not just in road shows, but meeting with corporate managements. And I believe one or two people at the top can make an enormous difference in a company.
Well, let's move forward. The new GM. Can you bring up chart 2, Rex? I want to look at auto sales. Here, folks, we used this yesterday with Diane Swank of Mesereau, and you can see over here, Steve Rattner. It's a chart. We do charter-paloozas. We don't want the debt one. That's the one we want, autos. Distance from 16 million. Jeff Green of our Detroit shop told me that GM can make money now, the new GM, with 10 million units. And we're above that, 11 or 12 million. With all of your experience here, how critical is it to get the nation and the auto industry back to 14 or 15, 16 million units?
Well, first, let me just say, Jeff is completely right. What happened as part of the bankruptcy of GM and the restructuring is that GM could not make money unless you were at 16 million. That break-even came down to 10 to 11. We took the liabilities from $120 billion to $55 billion. We took $8 billion a year of structural costs out of the company. And you don't have to believe me because you can see the proof. GM had 2 consecutive quarterly net income profits this year, first time in 4 years, at an 11.8 million SAR. Now, the rest of your question, it's very important to get the number up because it's part of the broader economic recovery that we need to have. But it will go up because we need to sell 15 million cars in this year simply to accommodate new drivers and the aging of the fleet.
And the rusting, the depreciation.
Right. And it will happen. It's only a question of when. I would concede it's a little slower than I would have guessed, just like the whole economy is a little slower than we would have guessed. But GM and Chrysler is making operating profits, and Ford is making very good net income profits. So this industry has been restructured to make money at 11.8 million SAR. At 15 million SAR, they will be gushing. They will be gushing profit.
You talk about the auto industry as a vital part. I'm a big believer in a manufacturing multiplier. A manufacturing nation with dollar depreciation, that can help a lot, can it?
It can, but we have a huge challenge facing us in manufacturing over the long term. In the short term, I think we have a cyclical recovery, certainly in the auto sector and elsewhere. But the global competition is not getting easier, it's getting harder. And one of the things I learned, because I was not a manufacturing guy, was to see this up close and personal in the auto industry. GM base wages for an existing UAW worker at GM are $28 an hour. In Mexico, they pay $7 an hour. In China, they pay $4 an hour. And in India, they pay $1 an hour. And their productivity in Mexico is every bit as good as it is in the U.S. And so this downward pressure on wages that you see happening, and the new GM workers who are coming in at $14 an hour, those pressures are not going away.
Are they going to be the same quality worker at 14?
Some of them are going to be exactly the same people. Some of them in this new Orion plant in Michigan were basically offered the chance to come back at 14 or go to some other plant or leave. They will be the same quality because people need jobs. But this is a problem that the UAW created, where you're going to have literally people working side by side doing the same job, some of whom make $28 an hour, some of whom make $14 an hour.
Over time, though, that phases out. I mean, the 28 phases out.
Yeah, but it heads to 14. This is not the American dream.
Right.
$14 an hour is $32,000 a year, plus or minus. It is below median income. It is not the high-paying, high-quality manufacturing jobs that you were just referring to.
How do we jumpstart innovation and what I'm thinking of Danny Blanchflower up at Dartmouth, a happiness in a labor force?
Look, I don't know how to stimulate that in the labor force, but I think the way to stimulate it in the economy is for the government to provide incentives to the private sector to develop these kinds of new businesses and new companies, not to do it with government grants the way we did in the stimulus program and elsewhere, but incentives to the private sector.
The rap on the president's administration is they're not anti-business. They're just what I'm going to call, I'm editorializing here, but excuse me, folks, business clueless. Okay, fine. With your experience with the Obama administration, was there any sense there of providing incentives to create jobs through investment?
I don't believe they are business ignorant or whatever your phrase was. I honestly don't. You can say, well, they've never worked in the private sector, some of them. That's not incorrect. But Tim Geithner, Larry Summers have been around business a long time. They've spent a lot of time with businessmen. Valerie Jarrett, who is the president's closest advisor, is a business person herself and has been tasked with outreach to the business community. Rahm Emanuel, when he was there, certainly had a lot of relationships in the business world. So I don't think what you're getting suffers by the lack of an individual in the White House, per se. I think what you're getting is, like everything, an amalgam of a lot of views and the political realities of the day.
Rex, let's bring up chart 3, if you would. This is a chart I made up on the Bloomberg. Per capita debt, and this is a chart back 20 years, but Steve, you can see it down here in the big monitor. That's a Joan Johnson chart if I ever saw one. She's my art director. But what's cool here, it's back 20 years, but in the last 10 years, per capita debt is doubled. The amount of debt per person. What is a Rattner prescription to at least turn the aircraft carrier, the USS debt, to turn it around?
Well, it's a terrible problem, and the Rattner prescription, for what it's worth, is that you've got to encourage personal savings, even at the cost of consumption. And we are, as you know, right at this moment in what Keynes called the paradox of thrift, that everybody agreed that the country that has to save more, but of course, as soon as it does that, consumption goes down, and you end up in a recession or prolonging a recession. So it's a tough wicket to play. But over time, that debt number has to go down, savings rate has to go up, and we're living beyond our means.
Part of the savings rate at the national level is less government deficit. Fine. If you get a better auto industry, if we get innovation, we get nominal GDP back up, by definition, we get tax receipts to improve a little bit. How much does that help?
You know, that's the classic supply-side argument, and I'm somewhat skeptical. There's no.
I believe I saw a waft of skepticism fly through our TV studios here.
I have long been on record as being somewhat skeptical about the ability of pure supply-side economics to work. Unfortunately, I think we're going to have to address the Bush tax cuts. We're going to have to address entitlements. We're going to have to do a lot of tough stuff. And what's really interesting to me right now is that the UK is doing it because they have a much more functional parliamentary system than our system. And so they are actually putting in place the tough medicine they need to. We are rearranging deck chairs. At best, we're rearranging deck chairs at the moment.
I could rip up the script here and go 5 ways. Let's do an audible. Are you Jets or Giants fan?
I'm a Giants fan.
Okay, that was very politically sad. He's trying to figure out how to give both answers. John Tisch is happy. Okay, over here, Barry Eichengreen of Berkeley, the great international economist. A world, I thought this was fascinating in Project Syndicate, a world of multiple reserve currencies. And Steve Rattner, this goes back to what you said before of a multipolar world. It's a different world that we're going to work in.
Okay, I think the least of the things we should worry about is the dollar as a reserve currency. It is going to be a multiple reserve currency world. I don't think it matters from us. We should be focused on our own issues, not on whether we're a reserve currency or not. And look, the cold, hard reality, as you know, is that the fall in the dollar, which you've been talking about today, is going to help our manufacturing sector. It is going to help exports. It is going to help curb some of our propensity on the import side, and all that's good. Where
do you invest right now?
Well, as you correctly disclosed, I help manage the mayor's money, and we are very bullish on the equity markets in general in the U.S. as well as particularly the U.S. and the emerging markets. We think are interesting opportunities.
I think that there's so many challenges to long-term management. You've got the advantage of a long theta. Do you see too much trading today? The media focus on it, the so-called flash crash and such. There's something about a longer-term perspective.
That is our strategy. We don't invest with managers who participate in that kind of daily trading. We don't invest in
weekly or monthly even.
We don't invest in things we can't understand and strategies we can't understand. And as you point out, it's a permanent pool of capital that will be there forever and can be invested for the long term. Look, I think it's important to have a lot of trading because that's what keeps markets liquid and that's what keeps markets efficient. Obviously, you can get overboard and you can have mistakes as occurred with the flash trade. But by and large, the capital markets activity is constructive. It's one of our great industries in this country. Financial services, technology, entertainment, these are our great export industries. And we
agriculture, too. Don't forget the middle. Don't forget the middle of America.
Fair enough, but it employs, what, 2% of Americans or something?
Excuse me.
But these are industries we should be nurturing, not trying to diminish.
Steve Rattner, thank you so much. The book, folks, is Overhaul on the Auto Industry, and just amazingly tense book about the Obama administration. There's the cover right there, an insider's account of the Obama administration's emergency rescue of the auto industry.